If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. This is the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm your host, Kathryn Hansen, and as a reminder from the last episode, from now on, I will be the only host of this podcast. If this is your first time listening, I want to let you know that at this point, the episodes assume that you have a basic understanding of the Brain Over Binge approach to recovery. The Brain Over Binge approach is an alternative approach that may be very different from what you've heard or what you've learned in the past. So if you find yourself feeling confused by something I say, or if you don't understand, for example, a term that I use, I encourage you to go back and listen to the first 11 episodes, because that is where you'll learn all of the basics of this brain-based approach that I'm sharing in this episode and in all future episodes. In those first 11 episodes, my former co-host, Cookie Rosenblum, and I shared all of the key fundamental concepts that you can put to use to help stop your binge eating habit. Now, the focus of this podcast is to address issues and questions that may come up for you as you apply these basic concepts. I'll help you maintain the progress that you've made and help you troubleshoot if maybe you haven't made the progress that you would have liked. And I'll also help you stay focused on achieving complete recovery. The title of today's show is, How Do I Stop Binge Eating Under Stress? It's a very common idea in mainstream eating disorder therapy and in countless self-help books and websites that binge eating is an attempt to deal with stress. You may have heard this popular theory that you, as a binge eater, are unable to cope with your stress. So you binge in order to soothe yourself or calm yourself or give yourself an escape from that stress. But even if you experience temporary pleasure and some relaxing brain chemicals that are produced when you binge, you realize that the destructive habit is only contributing to a more stress-filled life. Binge eating is not truly helping you cope with anything. It's just bringing you more pain and more stress. You know this rationally, but the problem is, in that moment when you experience an urge to binge and this desire to eat large amounts of food, actually whether you're stressed or not, you may feel powerless to do anything else but binge. And that includes anything else that would actually truly help you cope with your stress. Thinking that binge eating is a way that you cope with stress often just serves to increase your reliance on binge eating. In order to give up this habit, it's important to let go of the idea that it's benefiting you in any real way. Of course, everyone in the world needs a way to cope with their stress. Everyone has problems and emotions that they would like relief from sometimes, and that's no different for you. But the need to cope with stress isn't what is actually driving your binge eating. What's driving your binge eating is what comes between the stress and the binge. And that is the urge to binge, that desire to eat large amounts of food. You could be the most stressed out person in the world, but if you didn't have these urges to binge, you would not binge. There's nothing about stress that makes you binge. Only the urges do that. Now, I of course don't want you to be the most stressed out person in the world. I absolutely want you to find healthy ways to deal with any stress you're experiencing. However, I also want you to see that stress is not directly causing your binge eating. And I also want you to see that acting on the urges to binge, which are the direct cause of each and every binge, is actually preventing you from finding healthy and normal ways to deal with stress. The main message I want you to take away from this episode is that you absolutely can dismiss binge urges even when you're stressed. And if you don't understand at this point what I mean when I say dismiss binge urges, please go back and listen to those first 11 episodes that I mentioned in the beginning of the show. It's possible that you've spent a long time thinking that your binge eating is a way of dealing with stress, so that hearing me say that you can still avoid binge eating despite stress might bring up some anxiety or some fear for you. It may feel as if I'm trying to take away your way of coping, and that you'll just be left with this awful stress to deal with and you won't know how. If that's the case for you, I just want you to acknowledge that thought that you're having and acknowledge any fear or anxiety that you have. Just notice it, and then listen to the rest of what I have to say with an open mind, because I'm not trying to take anything away from you that is truly helping. But if you're here listening to this podcast and you're trying to recover, I know that binge eating is not truly helping you. I know that binge eating is just causing pain in your life and not bringing you any actual real relief from stress. Just try to stay open to the idea that you may benefit from separating the problem of stress from the problem of binge eating, realizing that they are two separate problems with two separate causes and two separate solutions. The causes of stress are many, but the cause of each binge is the same. It's the urge to binge. And likewise, the solutions for stress are many, but the solution to not binge eating is the same each time. You have to not act on the urge to binge. This is the case even if stress and binge eating have become linked over time for you by way of association. I have definitely been where you are, and I know it can be difficult to see that you still do have the ability to choose not to act on urges, even during times of stress. I want to give you a short story about my own experience with stress as it related to binge eating and recovery. I spent several years in therapy learning and believing that stress was a very important direct cause of my binge eating. And during those years, I tried so hard to learn to cope in other ways. But when those urges to binge came, I simply couldn't seem to implement any other healthy coping behaviors. And even if I did manage to cope better with stress or even avoid it altogether, that was certainly no guarantee that I wouldn't binge. I still binge during times of peace or calm or low stress. So then I thought what I needed was even less stress. So I often tried to make my life as easy as possible, which I found also meant it would be a lot less fulfilling because I wasn't working hard to achieve anything that I truly wanted. Then, because I learned that my binge eating could be caused by a variety of negative emotions, I blamed my binge eating on being unfulfilled. So then I would try taking on more responsibilities and start going after my dreams, and then I would feel more stress as a result, and I would still binge. So then I would try maybe a middle-of-the-road approach, and my urges would still get the best of me. Also, stress sometimes seemed to come out of nowhere, and it seemed impossible to avoid it completely or to always manage it well. It was very exhausting thinking that I needed to control my stress or keep it at a certain level in order to avoid a binge. When I realized this wasn't actually true and the urges to binge were the only direct cause, my mindset completely shifted. It was so exciting to learn that I could have control in any situation and that I didn't have to micromanage my life to avoid binge eating. So what happened was I actually started to enjoy experiencing stress in a little bit of a strange way. For a while after recovery, I would almost revel in being stressed, thinking, wow, look at me and how anxious and overwhelmed I am, and look, I'm not binging, and I don't even want to binge. It had nothing to do with the stress all along, and it never helped me with the stress anyway. It only created more. Those were just some of the thoughts that I would have. Feeling the stress and knowing that a binge would be useless and only bring more pain, and also knowing that I had complete control of my actions in spite of stress or any negative feeling was so empowering. Having unmanaged stress started to feel oddly liberating. I suddenly had the ability to just be stressed without worrying that it would lead to a binge, or without hurrying to try to figure out how to manage it to prevent a binge, which actually didn't work because, like I said, even when I seemingly did manage stress successfully, I still binged. My point of this personal story is to illustrate that you don't have to feel good and stress-free to avoid binge eating. That's a rather dangerous setup, in my opinion, because some level of stress is inevitably a part of life. You will face hardships now and in the future that you can't always cope well with. So know that regardless of what you face, You never have to binge as a result. Whenever the urges come up, you can recognize them as neurological junk from the lower brain and detach from those urges. All of that being said, I want to share with you something I teach in my group courses and in my second book, The Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide. And it's also about this relationship between stress and binge eating. You may be someone who fully understands that binge eating is not actually helping you cope with stress. You may know the urges are just neurological junk from the lower brain and that you can choose not to act upon them. However, when your day feels overwhelming and exhausting and highly stressful, you may seem to go right into action, the action of binging, without even remembering this information. It's as if stress puts you in a state that you don't actually apply what you've learned about dismissing urges. Or stress causes you to be so frazzled that you don't even recognize the binge urges beforehand and you go right into the binge. So it's not that you actually think you need to binge to cope, it's that when you're stressed, you simply don't seem to be thinking clearly at all. So you just act on the urges very automatically. If this is the case for you, you're definitely not alone, and your experience has a brain-based explanation. When we're stressed, the self-control functions in our higher brain actually suffer a little. The fight or flight state of stress is lower brain driven, so that habits and survival instincts feel stronger during times of stress, and you feel less connected to your true self in your higher brain. Again, it doesn't mean you're destined to binge, but stress can prime your brain to act in a more automatic way. Acting on the urges during times of stress doesn't then mean that you needed it to help you cope. It simply means that your brain was in a state that would have required you to put forth more effort to dismiss the urges, and you didn't quite have that mental energy. What I'm explaining here is basically just a shift in perspective regarding why you may currently binge more in times of stress than in non-stress. If this happens to you and you're having trouble dismissing the urges, you may indeed find that learning to manage stress better, or at least changing the way that you think about stress, can be something that gives you an edge over the urges. It can keep you in a state that's more conducive to using self-control and the resources of the higher brain that are so vital for dismissing urges. Managing stress better can also help you feel more centered and more connected to your goals and your motivations for recovery, which definitely works in your favor when urges arise. Managing stress also helps keep you out of that fight or flight state that makes your brain more likely to default to those habitual patterns. Learning to not binge is a new skill that you're learning, and therefore it takes up more energy in the higher brain, as any new skill would. Think of stress reduction as a way to ensure that your higher brain has the energy it needs so that you can more easily call upon it to dismiss the binge urges. You can use strategies like making sure you're getting enough sleep, improving nutrition, getting in some relaxation time or enjoyable forms of exercise. You can practice meditation. You can ask for help where you need it. And you can use any other stress management strategy that helps you keep your higher brain's energy up. Once not binge eating starts to become your new habit, it will become much more effortless to dismiss the urges. That wraps up today's show. I hope it has helped you see the connection between stress and binge eating in a much more practical way that helps you move forward in recovery. If you want to learn more about the Brain Over Binge approach, you can get a copy of my free ebook called The Brain Over Binge Basics by clicking the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you'll be back for the next episode. And remember, new episodes will be released every other week. No matter where you are in recovery, I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.